In the last part of this chapter, we'll be discussing about other peculiarities, other oddities that industrial growth witnessed, not only in Britain but also in India, and what are the other measures that modern industrialists, they took up to promote the industrial growth. So let's get started. European managing agencies, those agencies that I had enlisted you, the three names, which is Andrew Yule, they focused on products primarily for export trade. And you know this because England had started restricting certain imports from certain places, especially India, because they had introduced or they had imposed import duties, all right, so that they did not have to take up products from other countries, but rather they could use up the residents of England could use up the products that were being manufactured in England itself, and they could also then export the surplus to other countries. So basically, for its own financial gain. Indian businessmen in the 19th century produced yarn for export to China. So like I had told you that there were certain early entrepreneurs, and they had, after the dissolving after dissolving of after the dissolving of certain ports such as Hooghly, such as Surat, okay, India had left no option but to look for China, but to look for Japan, and there they were exporting certain products that were not being, exported by England. So England was exporting finished cotton or other fabric textiles. All right, India then took up to yarn because yarn was the only product that was not being exported by England, and hence India then could, defeat England in its competition by exporting yarn to China and Japan. All right, Swadeshi and the call for boycott of foreign goods. So we know that in the Swadeshi movement, Gandhiji emphasized that all of the foreign products should be boycotted, should not be used, and we should basically we should basically not cooperate with the the British government, right? So this Swadeshi movement, it kind of catapulted the production of the so-called dormant production of cotton textiles that were being produced in India. It started envisioning again. It started envisioning a future, or basically an area, an environment where the production of India made products, or production of India made goods, it soared. Okay, it soared, it got high, so that Indians could not use any of the foreign products, and they could only focus on the Indian made products. Okay, then shift from yarn to cloth production in 1906. Okay, so in 1912, you know that 1912 to 1914 was the time of the First World War. So the unrest, or the unrest that was created, the unrest that basically led towards this war, was already there on the go. It was already started to begin. It was already started to initiate at the beginning of the 1900s, or the beginning of the 20th century. So when England started focusing all of its strength on producing warfare, okay, goods related to the war, all right, then the cotton industry of England, okay, the export that was being made from the cotton industry of England, that reduced, and then India was the one who could then again start to produce cotton made products, cotton made textiles products, finished products, and then it could export that, so that India could also gain benefits. So there was a shift from yarn to cloth production in 1906 because all of England's attention, all of England's focus was there on the First World War. So England was then focused on producing war-related goods. Military uniforms, military equipments, etc. Okay, and its focus got lowered on the export of cotton-made products. All right. And like I have been explaining you, the impact of the World War I, immediately when the World War I was happening, India's home and export markets grew because the focus, the attention of the Britain was towards the war. It was related to the production of war-related equipments, okay, production of war-related equipments, so that whatever products India was then producing, not just limited to the textile industry, but also other products, right? Like pottery, glass, silk, etc. So India then could start exporting all of that, because the export, you can say, quantity of England was lowered, and then India could then start to, export its own local made products, local made commodities. Okay. Small scale industry still predominated India. Okay, even though cotton mills and other industrial sites were being, factories were being established, okay, there was still the rampant, you can say, existence of small scale production. All right, there was only 5% of the population that were devoted to industries in 1911, and the shift was only 10% in 1913. So there was still a large number of people that were devoted to small scale production. All right, so although 67% of large industries were located in Bengal and Bombay, this we have already learned, right? 1854 in Bombay and 1855 and 1862 in Bengal. But still, there was the increase and there was the demand for this small scale production, because industries still had a long way to gain the trust of people, and they still had a long way to procure so many people, so that the flourishing of industrial market could surpass that of small scale market. Okay, then small scale industries, it started, making shifts to certain machines, certain equipments that could make them flourish. All right, so handloom cloth production almost tripled between 1900 and 1940s, because of the introduction of a machine or an equipment known as the fly shuttle. So with the equipment, with the use of this equipment, okay, weavers could, employ, like you can see here in this picture, weavers could employ different horizontal and vertical patterns one by one, a sort of an intermeshed pattern. Okay, an intermeshed pattern. So this enabled the production of wide pieces of cloth, and not just wide pieces of cloth, but also a production of weaving patterns. All right, weaving patterns. Okay, and if you wanted to buy clothes, if anyone wanted to buy clothes, they were looking for new patterns, they were looking for wider clothes. All right, so naturally the handloom industry, it flourished, and over 35% of handlooms in India were fitted with a fly shuttle in 1941. But there are certain points that you have to keep here in mind, that not every, even though 35% of the handlooms were equipped with this machine fly shuttle, but not every poor farmer or not every poor weaver was equipped with certain machines or certain tools, smaller tools that could, help their small scale industries flourish. Okay, so although they were predominant, yes, but they were still competing against the cheaper products that were being flourished by the machineries of England, or now even by the machineries of India itself. All right, they still had to compete that market price. So although there were only few industries, but the products that were being, you can say, manufactured by those few industries was a lot, and they were cheaper. And the products that these small scale industries were producing, manufacturing, they were of course lower in quantity as compared to those machine made goods, and they were of course higher in price, because they were done by the intricate movement of hands. Okay, it was the handmade labor versus the machine made labor. Okay, and the next point that we need to remember here is that the condition of them, those poor weavers, was very deplorable, right? They still, because they were poor, they did not have enough means to provide for their family, so they were always on the lookout for jobs, always on the lookout for jobs that could either incorporate them into the industrial market area, all right, or could, basically, uplift their conditions, so that they could also start producing more, and they could also be on the demand. Okay, then there was also advertisement. All right, now you must have come across many ads now on television. They are not just ads on television, there are ads on newspapers, there are ads on your mobile phones, apps, whatever you're using. All right, so advertisements is not something modern, In concept, it was there, it was prevalent even during those times, even during the times of 18th and 19th century. And there, what used to happen, there were labels. Okay, there were labels that were printed on the piece of fabric that you were wearing. All right, so you can see here in this particular label, there is the image of Lord Krishna, the image of a baby Lord Krishna, and this label was printed on all the products related to babies that were manufactured by this company, Woodward's Gripe Water. And it has the logo, it has the motto, keeps baby well. Okay, then the introduction of historical figures, like you can see here over here. Okay, and this was not just done in the Indian local markets, mind you, this was done also by England. All right, cloth imported from Manchester. Why? Because these English people, they wanted to lure Indians into buying their products. So there were two ways. Okay, firstly, they used to write made in Manchester, of course, that used to, you know, that carried some symbol, right, that, oh, you're wearing an imported product, you're using a product that is made in England. All right, that is made in such a faraway country, a modern country. Okay, um, a modern country, more modern and more advanced than India is. All right, and the other method was the printing of certain Indian gods and goddesses and historical figures. So you have Krishna, you have Kartikeya, you have Saraswati, all these gods and goddesses figures and historical figures. So the printing on the label of these figures also gave certain adherence to the culture of India. So it was like, oh, you're not just wearing a product that is made in Manchester, that is exotic, that is foreign, but these foreigners, they're also paying reverence to our culture, paying reverence to our gods, goddesses, our historical figures. So this must hold some importance. So this is how these products, these Englishmen, they used to lure the local Indians to buy their products. Okay. But when the Swadeshi movement was on the go, that means when the local Indians, they started under the leadership of Gandhiji, they started boycotting foreign goods. Then India came up with its own symbols, its own, you can say, private symbols, such as you can see over here. This is goddess. This goddess figure is providing clothes to this Indian couple, this local couple. Okay, and this is basically, you can say, and an amplification that, you know, you should buy, and you should basically manufacture, okay, and wear your own produce and not be dependent on any foreign product. So the figure of this Indian goddess providing these clothes to this Indian couple is a symbol that that you should wear those products that you are manufacturing on your own, and you should not be dependent on any foreign goods. So these advertisements also became a national message when the Swadeshi movement was on the go. Okay. Now we'll be encountering 10 different questions that would help us understand this chapter more. Okay. Explain why women workers in Britain attacked the spinning jenny. So this we have already seen, that the spinning jenny was introduced in 1674 by James Hargreaves. Okay, and this machine, okay, this machine, it ensured that one wheel was connected to many spindles. One wheel was connected to many spindles, if you may remember that figure in that slide. Okay, and this ensured that only one woman could now operate on and could now supervise on the spinning of many fabrics, on the spinning of many yarns, because that one woman was not just catering to one spindle, but rather was catering to many spindles, because that one woman could control that one wheel that could then spin many yarns. Okay, so that is why the women workers, they attacked the spinning jenny, because these women workers were the people that were employed in the work of spinning. All right, so because of the advent of the spinning jenny, this rendered all of the women workers almost unemployed, because one woman is now replacing, say, 10 women. All right, so if one woman is replacing these 10 women, so these 10 women, they are unemployed. Okay, so therefore they started attacking the spinning jenny, because this was now a question of their own livelihood. Okay, in the 17th century, merchants from towns in Europe, began employing peasants and artisans within the villages. So we have already seen this this pattern. This is the pattern of proto-industrialization. Okay, and the rich merchants from the towns in Europe, they started employing these poorer peasants and artisans so that they could weave for them. They could weave what? They could weave yarns, or they could weave fabric. All right, and then whatever fabric, yarn these poor people, poor peasants, they used to weave in the countryside, in the confines of their own homes, and the care of their own people. Okay, then these products, they were transferred to cities. What cities? Such as London mainly, also Manchester, but London was the main city that they were being transported to. And in the London, these products were finished. So whatever finishing embroidery, whatever other finishing touch that was given to these fabrics, that was done in London. So this was a very healthy way of a healthy balance between the richer people in the towns and the poorer people in the peasants. Okay, a symbol of proto-industrialization. Why did the port of Surat decline by the end of 18th century? All right, the port of Surat declined because in the 1760s, the East India Company was established. Means that company that was responsible, that was operated by the Britishers. And when the Britishers, they started gaining a monopoly over the trade that was going on in India, then the important trade centers such as Surat, such as Hooghly, okay, they Surat, who would ensure that products were being exported to the Middle East, okay, and Hooghly, that ensured the port that ensured that products were being exported to the southern Asian countries. So when the East India Company established itself in 1760, this was nullified, okay, or this was obstructed because the East India Company wanted to gain a monopoly of the Indian trade system. So they wanted to get away of the Indian trade system in the first place. In order to do that, it declined, it stopped this exchange of trade, this exchange of system that was going on in Surat, so that it could establish its own centers, Bombay and Calcutta. Okay. Then you have, why did the East India Company appoint Gomosthas to supervise weavers in India? So they appointed Gomosthas so that the connection between the Indians, such as the connection between the rich merchants, okay, and the poorer peasants. This the same basically pattern that was there in the discussion of proto-industrialization of England. So this connection, this bond could break. Okay, and what did the Gomosthas do? They supervised weavers. So they made sure that whatever work these peasants, these weavers were doing, those works were up to mark. Okay, and all the details, all the finer intricacies were in place, and they used to get beaten up, they used to get reprimanded if their products was not being supplied to them on time, delivered to them on time. Now we'll be encountering some true or some statements, and we have to label them as true or false. Okay, so, and I'll be explaining you why it is either true or false. So at the end of the 19th century, 80% of the total workforce in Europe was employed in the technologically advanced industrial sector. This is false, because if you may remember, when industrialization was being started in England, it was very new to the people there. These machines were expensive. The cost of their repair, the cost of their repair, if a certain damage was done, that was also very expensive. And then people preferred handmade products because they had finer details, and the aristocrats, they were fond of the elegant pieces of the handmade product. So only less than 20% of the total workforce of Europe was employed in the technologically advanced sector. And it was not until the late 18th and the early 19th century that more people started coming up. But even then, the small scale production was on the go, and it was only after or during the war periods that this industrialization gained its speed. The international market for fine textiles was dominated by India till the 18th century. False. Alright, the international market for fine textiles was not dominated by India till the 18th century. International market for fine textiles was dominated by India till the 18th century. This is true. This is true because the East India Company had set up in 1760s. All right, and the industrialization in Europe, the setup of cotton factories, cotton mills in Europe was done in 1730s, right? So it was not until the you can say the mid 1800s, or you can say it was not until the 1800s that the spread of production, the spread of the products of England factories that became widespread in other places. All right. So till that happened. All right. So till the 1800s or till the mid 1800s, India dominated this international market for fine textiles because India used to export its production to England, not just England, to China, to Japan, to other areas as well. All right, and it was only after the setup of the East India Company in 1760s and basically more towards the 1800s that this cycle of India, or this you can say space of India in the international market was obliterated, so that England could then start exporting its products. Okay. State whether the following is true or false. The American Civil War resulted in the reduction of cotton exports from India. So this is false because the American Civil War, when America was involved in its own civil war, then Britain started importing cotton, especially raw cotton, from India. All right, because earlier Britain used to import raw cotton from America, but during the American Civil War, Britain started importing cotton from India. So, no, it did not result in the reduction of cotton exports, rather, it resulted in the increase, in the increment of cotton exports from India. The introduction of the fly shuttle enabled handloom workers to improve their productivity. This is true because the fly shuttle enabled that wider stretches or wider patterns of fabric could be produced, and since it was a machinery equipment, all right. So this rendered that people could produce more clothes in less number of time. All right. So the fly shuttle it did enable handloom workers to improve their productivity. Explain what is meant by proto-industrialization. So we have already covered this concept at least 2 to 3 times. So I'll be summarizing you here again. Proto means the beginning, okay, the beginning of a nascent stage, you can say, or a thing that is beginning to develop, beginning to form, okay. So we had seen this concept in just the beginning of this chapter, that proto-industrialization was the period of the early 1700s, before the setting up of factories, when the rich merchants living in the cities, they employed poorer peasants, or they employed poor peasants that were living in the villages, or that were living in the countryside. Okay, they employed them, they ensured that they made fabric, yarn, okay, all those important materials, and then these rich merchants, they transported those materials to the cities, important city centers such as London, where finished products were made. All right, so this was the kind of exchange system, or this was the kind of trade system that was there in England in the early 1700s. Not just England, but we have seen that it was also there in India as well. And this is what is meant by proto-industrialization. Means that period that accommodated all those events that was happening before the advent of industries, before the advent of factories or industries. Okay. Then you have, why did some industrialists in 19th century Europe, that means in the 1800s, prefer hand labor over machines? So this we have also covered, that initially when industries or machines, they started encompassing European cities. So Britishers, they were very hesitant because these machines, they were costly, they were big, they were huge. So the setting up of these industries, these machines, was also very cumbersome basically. Okay, and the repair Repair work was also expensive. So repair was expensive. All right. So, and the products that were the result of hand labor or handmade labor that produced finer details. Okay, that produced finer details, that had finer intricacies. Okay, and moreover, the rich aristocrats, they had a preference for elegant clothes. They had a preference for elegant clothes, for rich clothes. All right, so they had a preference basically for these clothes that were made up of finer details and intricacies. And this finer details and intricacies could only be done by hand labor. The machine made labor or the machine made products was not so efficient in producing these finer details. All right, so these were the reasons that why some industrialists still in the 19th century, they preferred the hand labor over the machine labor, because the machines were expensive, they were big, they were cumbersome, the repair work was expensive. And some aristocrats, the richer people who would be paying them more, they fancied finer details. Okay, and those finer details, since they could be only produced by handmade labor and that was not efficient in the machines, that is why they preferred handmade labor over machines. How did the East India Company procure regular supplies of cotton and silk textiles from Indian weavers? So, if you may remember, the East India Company had appointed certain important persons known as the Gumosthas. These Gumosthas were basically supervisors. They were supervisors of these Indian weavers, and they would get reprimanded or they would get even beaten up if they did not deliver their products on time. Moreover, East India Company ensured that these Indian weavers were getting loans so that they could go up and buy raw materials, and they could get on with the production of the fabric. All right, and since they were being offered loan, and of course they would be allowed to, they would then be returning the loan part by part. Okay, so this ensured that the Indian weavers, they were sort of committed. They were committed to the respective factory or to the respective, you can say, company. Okay, so this commitment to the respective company or to the respective industrialist, all right, this also ensured that the industrialists, they were getting regular supplies of cotton, and because this and enabled those Indian viewers to not go and to not flock towards other dealers, but rather to be committed to the respective company that had given them the loans. And of course, the other thing is that there was this person known as jobbers, or job was the plural, job was the singular. So this person, he held some authority because this person was responsible for the recruitment of certain potential workers, certain potential weavers for the respective company. So these were the initiatives that the East India Company took in order to get regular supplies of cotton and silk textiles. Imagine that you have been asked to write an article for an encyclopedia on Britain and the history of cotton. Write your piece using information from the entire chapter. In this entire chapter, we have learned that how there was first the prevalence of proto-industrialization, then how this proto-industrialization was getting displaced by industries, and before these large factories came up, small equipment started displacing handmade work. Equipment such as the spinning jenny, wait, equipment such as the spinning jennies, all right, and what else? And you have other machineries that could then produce the yarn, or you can say the fabric of cotton in lesser amount of time, and with you can say less amount of handmade labor or handmade work involved. All right, so these machines, these equipments, and all of this ensured that the proto-industrialization was displaced, and finally mills or industries, they came about in Europe, or they came about in Britain. All right. So I'm sure and I hope that whatever points we have been discussing till now regarding the proto-industrialization, regarding the advent of newer and newer equipments, leading to the establishment of mills and factories. I am sure and I hope that you'll be able to write this part. Okay. Why did industrial production in India increase during the First World War? This we have also discussed, that the First World War 1914 to 1918, what was happening, that Britain was solely focused on the production of war related items, okay, or war related products, military products, arms and guns and everything. Alright, so war related products, that was the first priority of Britain. Uh, uh, the first priority of Britain, that those products would only get produced. Okay, so industrial production in India increased because since Britain was only focused on establishing, on manufacturing certain items, and those items were not just being exported to countries that were in war, but those were also being consumed. So whatever other production was there, such as textile production or other small scale production, you can say, such as of glasses, of breweries, okay, okay, and other products. All right. Then India came up. India started producing all of these. Again, started falling back to its trade system. All right, and started producing cotton textiles, not just raw material, but the whole product, the textiles, the finished products, and other products. And while Britain was involved in its war, okay, India was then exporting all of these products to its neighboring countries and to other areas. So this is why industrial production in India increased during the First World War. So with this question, we come towards the end of this chapter, and I hope the whole history, you can understand this whole history as a form of a story where certain areas, certain you can say establishment of machines was beginning to happen, why it was beginning to happen, how it happened, and of course how it affected all those people who were then rendered unemployed due to the rising population, and how then these machines started coping up with those unemployment cases. Okay, so this was all that we had discussed in this chapter. And the next part, I'll be giving you a quick revision. We will be recapitulating the important points. This is the final part of the chapter where I'll be giving you a quick revision, and I'll be narrating to you again all the important points in summaries. Okay, so 1730s was the time when the first factories in England were set up. Before this time was the period of proto-industrialization, where the rich merchants, they hired poor weavers, and the poor weavers worked in the confines of their own homes. 1764, the spinning jenny was introduced, that one-wheeled machine equipment that had many spindles, and that provoked the women workers. 1781, the production of steam engine, that then again led to the increase in the production of iron and steel products. All right. In 1854, when the establishment of East India Company happened in 1760, then after nearly a century later, England started establishing factories in India. 1854 was the time when the first cotton mill was set up in Mumbai, and in 1855 and in 1862, jute mills then were started being set up in Bengal. All right. Before factories developed, there was large-scale industrialization, and this we have already learned via the concept of proto-industrialization that I had again explained to you in the previous slide. Then, cotton, iron, steel. These were the leading sectors in Britain. Cotton was the most dynamic sector, of course, and after the introduction of steam engine, iron and steel were also on the go. 1730s, the earliest factories in England were set up, all right, and people started flocking from countryside towards the cities, because unlike the era of proto-industrialization, the advent of factories meant that workers had now to come to the factories in order to work. And Richard Arkwright was the person who created the cotton mill in England, okay, in the 1730s. Then you have James Watt, who introduced steam engine in 1781. That of course increased the production, again I'm writing here, iron and steel products, and this ensured that more people started getting job, because of course these people were getting employed in the factories, and besides that they were also getting employed in work such as digging up the tunnels and laying up the places where the woods and iron and steel products could be bolted into place. Okay, then still there was the fear of unemployment, because no matter how many people got the jobs, there were still many people who were left behind, because machines, it displaced many workers at one go. All right, and because of the rising population, there were always unemployed workers. Okay, this made hostile to the introduction of new technology. And the other factor was that even though there were workers employed, okay, in machine and the factories industry, but they still had low wages, because the rich merchants, they knew that there are many people who want job. All right, many people who want job. So if I'm just giving them half the price and what they deserve, they'll still be willing to work. They'll still be eager to work, because the number of unemployment was just huge. Okay. Then 1750s, European companies gradually gained power, resulting in the decline of old ports. Because when the East India Company was finally established, important ports such as Surat and Hooghly, Britishers got rid of them, and they instead set up newer ports in Bombay and Calcutta, because they wanted to topple the Indian trade system altogether and set up newer trade system over which the authority could be only towards in the hands of Britain. Okay. Then the East India Company appointed Gomostas, those important supervisors basically, to maintain control, and they ensured that the weavers are doing their jobs efficiently, and they're delivering the products on time. The rise of cotton manufacturing in England, Manchester, it narrowed the local and export markets for Indian weavers, because earlier England used to import textiles from India, but when industry started rising in England started imposing import duties, certain tariffs on Indian products, and then started exporting its cheaper machine-made products in Indian markets. So this made already India was not able to export products because of the import duties in England. And when machine-made goods were being imported to India or being exported by England, then people in India started flocking to buy those cheaper machine-made products. All right. Indian cotton once again grew in demand during the American Civil War, because America was the supplier of raw cotton to Britain. But when America got involved in its conflicts of Civil War, Britain started importing raw material from India. Okay. And finally, large-scale industrialization, although it was taking place, but still the small-scale production or the small-scale industrialization, they were still prominent, especially the handloom mills, they were still prominent. All right, because even though a lot many people were employed in these large-scale industrialization, fewer and fewer people, they were flocking towards buying these machine-made equipments, because the kind of details that you got in handmade products, that were uncomparable to the ones that you got from machines. And how people used to, England or Britishers or Indians both, how did they used to establish the certainty that people are going to buy their respective products? By advertising. And how do they advertise? By printing of the images of Indian gods, important historical figures, all right, on the labels of the cloths. Okay, so in Indian gods, important personages, emperors and nawabs, they were regularly printed on the label, so that if the foreign goods were being supplied to India, the people in India, they had this ideology that yes, they are wearing clothes that were made in Manchester, and oh look, they revere our culture because they have also printed our gods or our important emperors. Okay, then advertisements, they also became a vehicle of the nationalist message of Swadeshi movement, because during the Swadeshi movement, Indian locals, they started boycotting the use of foreign products, and they started manufacturing and using their own products. So important labels such as Saraswati giving clothes to Indians, that became a symbol that people should start to manufacture and use their own products and not be dependent on foreign made goods. So this was all that you had to learn in this chapter. I hope this makes some sense, and I hope I was able to do justice to it. And thank you so much for joining me here on Study Room. I'll be again meeting you and discussing other interesting chapters. Thank you so much. Study well and take care.